The idea of choice, the other wake-up call, like within that for me was like, oh, where do we draw the line then? If they can choose this about me, what else is going to be up for?
I mean, we're seeing that now.
Access denied. Access denied. Access denied.
Hey y'all, it's your host Jessica Jordan, and I'm here on Access Denied, the podcast dedicated to helping you get over your fear of rejection, one episode at a time. Let's go! Hey y'all, and welcome to episode number 5 of Access Denied. I am so excited because today I am joined by Haley Lickstein. Haley is an incredible Democratic strategist and political influencer who uses her platforms to spread awareness about important political issues that are going to be on our ballots in November. If you, like me, are based in the United States, then I'm sure that you know that we're currently in the middle of a very messy election season. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and there's a lot of feelings on both sides of the political spectrum, which is why I'm so excited to have Haley on today's podcast. Because something I really admire about her and the work that she does is her ability to communicate information surrounding these important issues in a way that I think is very digestible and relatable. In today's episode, Haley shares what it's like to have a career in the policy and political advocacy space, including what happens when the candidate that you're pushing for loses an election. We each share our stories of our involvement in the reproductive justice movement and just generally share some nuggets of wisdom for how to stay motivated and hopeful in these chaotic times. Finally, one thing that we talk a lot about is the importance of voting in this election cycle. So if you're listening right now, I would love it if you could go check your voter registration status, register to vote if you're not, and make sure that you get to the polls this election season. Your voice matters so much, friends. But without further ado, let's dive into the episode. You're not going to want to miss this conversation. Here we go. Haley, welcome to Access Denied. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be chatting with you.
Likewise, you have been such a ray of sunshine. We've run into each other now, like 3 times in the last 2 to 3 months.
It's been so fun getting to see you at things where I didn't even expect it, and it's such a joy. So
I know, and it's always in a different city. We're always somewhere. It's so great and so fun, and you always have such a beautiful and positive smile on your face, I feel like, and
right back at you.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's so nice to have you here. Can you introduce yourself, tell everybody listening a little bit about you and what you do?
Yeah, hi, I'm Haley Lickstein, and I'm a Democratic strategist and political influencer focused on reproductive rights and reproductive justice and just women's issues in general. And then work to try to help creators feel like they feel empowered and confident to lean in, get organized, and use their platform to talk about whatever issues matter to them.
Love it. You're doing incredible work. That's actually how we met, was through, I believe, the Creators for Repro conference, right? Was that the first time? Yeah.
That was awesome.
That was awesome. That was one of my first really big events surrounding political content, I think.
Yeah.
As a disabled woman, my life is inherently political in many ways, so I'm not shy to political conversations, but that was my first thing that I worked with an organization towards a topic that is really something I'm passionate about, and I know you're passionate about it as well. And I know it's a very important topic of conversation right now.
It is. But what you just said is super interesting to me, where you were like, my life is inherently political. I think a lot of creators or people might not identify with that, but the fact is everyone's life is inherently political, and your life is constantly being impacted by politics, whether it's on the local level or the national level. And if you don't feel it in your daily life already, it's just a matter of time. So using your voice is one of those things where you don't want to say, I wish I had done it sooner.
I'm so glad you said that, because, I say that because disability is a very active, specific minority group that has discrimination. There's justices and injustices happening every single day within that. But every single person is impacted by politics. Every single person is a political being, because so much of our lives is impacted by that, whether it be at the economic level, whether it be access to our bodies. There are so many different things that I think I wish more people would feel confident in sharing their stories and using any platform that they have. It doesn't matter if it's you have 100 followers or 100,000 followers. It just doesn't matter. Just speaking.
100%. I like the quote that says, you might not do politics, but politics will always do you. And I think that that really, for me, hits the nail on the head about people who are like, well, it doesn't impact me. I'm like, do you go to school? Do you go to the doctor? Do you park your car on the street? Do you buy tickets to a concert? Like, all of those things are impacted by policy.
Every single one of them. Every single thing that we do. I mean, I just watched one of your videos where you're like talking about Kamala's big platform on like the middle class and how she's really committed to lowering the prices of groceries.
Yeah.
Everybody's got to eat. Everybody has to eat.
Yes. And it's one of those things where everyone likes to complain about the cost of groceries, but then doesn't show up in November. And I'm like, the people you are electing in office have the power to help lower the price of groceries or not lower the price. So yes, everything is so political, but I think the word politics kind of scares people sometimes, which is why it's so awesome when people just tell it in an organic way about their stories or why things are important to them.
Which is actually one of the reasons I love your content and one of the reasons I wanted to have you on to Access Denied, because I think you do a really good way, or that was not real words, you have a really good way of communicating these issues that can get so just befuddled in all of the language that people use and all of the jargon and the media slogans and the headlines. And you do a really good job of bringing us back down to, no, Kamala's going to lower the price of groceries. That's such an easy sentence to digest. And it's a fact. She's talked about it.
Mm-hmm. I think that, one of the things that Donald Trump, dare I say his name, has done better is speak in a language that's really understandable for people. And that's something that is so important when you're trying to bring people in, is making it so it's not super wonky or super policy or high level. But I went to a panel this week that said, how do you talk to politics to the normies? And I feel like when we're in this circle, or like I'm in this circle or bubble sometimes with people who are super wonky and in the weeds, it is easy for people to just tune that out. Like, what is a tariff? What is whatever? Like, and I think you lose people when you're not talking about just the very true facts. Help you buy a home, your first time home buyer, help you start a small business, help you lower the cost of your groceries. Like, these are very understandable things that impact everyone.
100%. And I think it's important that you brought that up about the language barrier that I think is in politics. I myself, I have a bachelor's degree from the University of Notre Dame, and I educate myself as much as I can on these policies every day, but I can still get lost in it easily. There's just so much to digest. And so I think it's so important to have creators meeting us on our For You pages, just in the wild, if you will, and talking at a level that is just so to the point and in very digestible phrases and sentences. That's just so helpful, especially when the stakes are this high.
They're so high. But also one of the things that I think is why creators are such powerful messengers and, really able to drive home the messaging about the issues they care about is because people are choosing to follow you. Like, you are able to talk to your community as a creator in a way that nobody else can. They trust you already. They're tuning in already. And so you have a relationship with that community that you've built. And rather than like a politician or a news network who doesn't have that relationship turning in and saying like, this is why you should care about this, it just doesn't hit the same. Like, I think you're able as a creator to talk to the community you've built in such an authentic way, and it comes across like that.
100%. And I think that's one reason a lot of creators will refer to their community as, hey, friends, because it kind of feels like a friendly relationship. And I know we can get into the parasocial dynamics that can like create in some sketchy situations. But I think generally speaking, it's a positive, right? Because it brings it back down. There are so many people that are like, oh, well, I just love when creators make it look like it's a FaceTime call, like we're just having a chat. There's a reason for that.
I love it personally. And I think while you can talk about those dynamics, it's allowed people to also be interconnected in a way that we've never had before. And people have a level of transparency in our government that we've never had before, and be able to like hold people accountable in a different level, like all of these things. But I also think even if you don't agree with us that it's a positive dynamic or like a positive thing, it's the truth. It's the reality, right? Like for Gen Z, social media has surpassed Google as their search engine. Like TikTok is the #1 search engine. So you have to adapt. And so for the people who don't think like creators should be talking about these issues, well, that's where people are, and that's where they're talking about these things. So it's time to do it.
Actually, I think this brings up a really great transition into a topic I wanted to discuss with you, because we were both at the DNC.
Yes, you were.
And there has been a lot of media coverage about creators being on site for that and being treated like press. And I think that that's a very interesting conversation, because it shows kind of the importance of creators in the media landscape and how we do have to adapt. And we are a part of that storytelling because we do it in a non-BS type of way. Like, we're not hidden behind paywalls. We're not off. I mean, some people maybe have subscriptions or whatever, but you know what I mean? Like, generally speaking, there's no paywalls. There's no corporate situation that's telling us we have to like put this angle on or use this clickbait headline. We just share the experience. And we've gotten a lot of flack for that from a lot of traditional media.
You know, we have, and I am not one to knock traditional media. Listen, like that is what has inspired me in some ways to do the work that I'm doing, that got me to the point that I am. And what I thought, I always say, like, advocacy is not a competition. There is room and space and a lane for everybody. And the thing is that my sister, who's a sophomore in college, and her friends are not sitting down and watching MSNBC at night. They just aren't. And whether I was at the DNC or I wasn't, they aren't doing that. So by allowing us to be at the DNC, they are going on their phone at night and scrolling through TikTok. And so now they're also seeing coverage as well. And so I just think, like, I understand that there was, you know, some tension in the area, but I think that's growing pains. I think there's growing pains all the time in any industry. And we're seeing the industry evolve and adapt to begin to include influencers. And this is the first time that's ever been happened. So there wasn't like maybe a complete like rules in place or whatever it is, but it's so powerful and it's so important, and it brings in people that we aren't reaching. So I think it was phenomenal. I was so honored to be there. And I hope, and I really believe that influencers being there helped us like reach people who wouldn't have otherwise been receiving coverage of the DNC.
I think you hit the nail on the head, and I'm so glad that you mentioned the idea there is room for both. It's not one or the other. And making it a competition, having all of these headlines that essentially are pitting creators against traditional media. I don't know a single creator that's against traditional media, to be quite honest.
Creator who wants to be traditional media. And I think that's really key. Is like, from this perspective, I have friends who are super newsy in their creator space. Like, it's like every day they're like telling you the news. Friends who are not newsy at all, or like somewhere in between. And not a single one of them has ever told me that that's their end game or desire or goal. So I just don't think, I think maybe like outward looking in, people think there's this like competitive situation in play, but I just don't think that's the reality.
I don't think it's the reality either. And I think that's a really good point, that we serve two different audiences, we serve two different purposes, and we are two different entities, and we both have validity and value and importance in not just the political space, but in journalism as a whole.
And the other thing, if I could talk about this all day, but I won't. But the other thing I would say on this is, like, I really think that in the future down the line, to be the most effective and impactful, traditional media influencers need to work together. Like, so many times stumble upon a really good story that some incredible journalist has written that I want to go read because I saw an influencer mention it or talk about it. Like, I'm not, I try to read as much as possible and diversify my things, but I'm not like combing through the Wall Street Journal and the Atlantic and like all of these things every single day. But I do have these influencers who are friends of mine or not friends of mine that I admire, that I follow. And when they say like this article written by this journalist or this like interview done by this reporter was really helpful or impactful for me, it raises the flag for me to go watch it or to tune in or to read it. And I think like there is a world where influencers and traditional media collaborate that could be so impactful and like really expand reach.
I never even considered that, to be quite honest with you, and I kind of love it because so you and I, we both do work lifestyle and impact space, and I think there's an interesting conversation there in the influencer space in general about working with brands, the ethics behind working with some of it. And, people got to eat. We have to make money and live and all of that. And I mean, biased, but I don't think there's anything wrong with working in that space. But I also know that we work with organizations and we get paid by organizations to talk about topics that we care about and spread awareness. But I love the idea of working with like media and journalists and getting eyes, because you see Netflix partnering with people to get eyes on like their TV shows and
And so I think like, it would the same way that like MSNBC sends correspondents to things, like there's a way to then be funneling that information and the polls and research that they're doing to a younger audience who might not be tuned in. And I also think that will be integral to traditional media, like crossing over to to younger people watching and paying attention.
100%. I love that perspective. Yeah, you've just like opened my mind to like so many possibilities.
So many.
But I want to hear more about your story and how you became a creator, because I think everybody's like origin story for this path of life is always so interesting.
Yeah, it's so funny. I did not set out to be a creator, but I was always an activist. And I think today those lines are super blurred. I call myself like a civic influencer instead of a creator, but I think growing up, I was always involved in advocacy. I grew up in a house that really, really valued grassroots advocacy in like the most local sense of the word and how you can picture it, like door knocking when I was in elementary school with my mom for our city council, or like I think about, and the story is so crazy to me because I'm like the sort of self-power that my mom instilled in me when I was really young, but was upset about something at school and I can't even remember what it was. I need to ask her. But she was like, write a letter to the school board and I'll take you to the school board meeting and you can read it during public comment. And I was maybe 8 or 9 and actually did this. And I think like she was like, that's how if you're upset about something, do something about it. And that was like that family I grew up in was like, if you are upset, I don't want to hear it, like do something. And that starts with like your local electeds. And really instilled this sense to me very naively, I must say, that is just how simple it is and that I can just do something and make a change if I don't like it. I just need to go tell them, which obviously not the way it works, but it did get me like, okay, I believe in the power of transformative change. And then I went to college in DC, was like political science person and got really involved. I did a multitude of like internships and jobs at the DNC and at Emily's List and Planned Parenthood and just organizations that really continued to educate me on the policy landscape. And then the overturning of Roe v. Wade happened. And throughout all this time, I had always been a pretty loud activist. I was at rallies and marches for all the things from Black Lives Matter to gun control. Like I'm a protest girl. Like, I don't know. I just was living in DC, like, drinking the what is it called? Drinking the
Kool-Aid. Yes.
Thank you, that one. And then when Roe v. Wade got overturned, after that, but before the 2022 midterms, so that was in the beginning of the summer of 2022, leading up to the midterms, I just felt like there was such an incredible disconnect between local elections, the state level elections, and the overturning of Roe, and that people were so angry and mad. But I didn't think understood, not everyone, I'm like generalizing here, but like a lot of my friends or people who I would speak to understand like how important certain elections were, certain things were right now in the political climate that we were now in. And I started posting on TikTok. I made a TikTok account in that year, and I was like, posted what I was calling a series of campaigns and coffee. And I would like have a cup of coffee in the morning. I don't actually drink coffee, so it was like some sort of beverage, and talk about a campaign that I wanted people to be tuned in on or about leading up to the midterms. And that kind of started it. And then I just realized what a powerful tool for communication and like organizing social media was. And I never really looked back. And now I'm doing this work full time.
That is so cool. I love that your mom instilled in you from such a young age this idea of like using your voice.
Yeah.
I think that is so empowering for a young woman to hear. And, you know, you said naively, like, oh, well, I can just go and talk to somebody and make it a change. Maybe a little naive, but at the same time, that's how all great movements get started, is just an idea, maybe
I mean,
a
it's
handful
just
of
a very boiled down way of how it works. But yes, she like, I still believe to my, look, you don't do this work if you don't believe that change is possible. Like, I'm a really strong believer in right now, the messaging's all very much like, look at all these things that are at stake if you don't vote this November. Like, all these things are at stake. But I'm a believer in we don't just vote because of everything that's at stake, but because we vote because of everything we believe in and like the hope we have for a better future. And when I'm organizing, I feel the same way. Like, yes, there's a lot at stake, but also we actually believe that the things that we want are possible and like possible for our children one day. And I'm much more driven by hope than fear. So,
you know, that brings up the quote from the Hunger Games series for me. Hope is the only thing stronger than fear. And I
oh my
grew up on that
gosh, I'm gonna
series,
start
so
using that one.
there you go. Take it right out of President Snow's mouth. And
Oh no. That was
you
that
know, but
one.
he was right though. He's correct.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I feel like if you didn't have hope anymore, you wouldn't have the energy to keep doing the work that we're doing, right? But like, what energizes me, obviously, there's like a baseline level of like a little bit of fear, but what energizes me is hope.
And, you know, the topic of this podcast really comes down to like stories of rejection, discrimination, being told no. There's a lot of that in politics. There's a lot of, especially right now, toxicity on both sides in many ways, and a lot of fear mongering and a lot of just rejection in the broadest sense of the word. And I think you saying that is a really key situation. And so I would love for you to like talk more about how when things are getting difficult, when maybe you're starting to lose that hope, how do you kind of like reignite it a little bit? Because there's been some very anti-hope moments. I don't know how else to say that right now.
Listen, there's been so many anti-hope moments. There's been so many weird moments, and it's just gonna keep getting like weirder and scarier. And I know that. Like, every time you think it might not get weirder, it's going to get weirder. It's going to get scarier. Like, there's no like plateauing, I don't think, in this current climate. I think we're just going on this roller coaster that's never dropping. But what gives me hope is looking at, well, I have two answers. One is looking at my community, like the community of people I'm around who are doing such incredible things, because like I see so many young people that I work with and they are the future, really doing things that just are so inspiring to me. And that keeps me going, because I'm like, eventually all these old people are going to go away and we're going to be in office. Not me personally, but like the people that we're around are going to be in office, and they have a vision that I think is incredible. But the second thing that gives me hope is I try to pay a lot of attention to local politics, which I highly recommend doing. It does take like a little bit of a stomach because crazy, if you're living in certain states, your local politics might be crazy. But for most people, I think seeing the like everyday people who are running for city council or mayor or school board or attorney general or whatever it is so inspiring to me. And like those people have such an outsized impact on your daily life, and seeing those stories and the people who have like had lost a child to gun control or had to fight to get abortion access, turning those stories into running for office and representing their communities. I don't know. It just inspires me in such a like gives me chills way of these are the people who are leading most of our communities across the country, and they keep me giving. They fuel me.
I think both of those points are so important, and I want to touch on both of them because, you know, the community aspect, I talk about this all the time. As a disabled woman, me finding the disability community has helped me really blossom into the person I am today. It's helped me feel less alone. I have a rare disease. It affects 60 people worldwide. That can feel very isolating, very scary. And suddenly, okay, people might not have my exact condition, but people are having similar experiences. And I think the power of community in anything that you do, whether it's politics or even just in your personal life, the people you surround yourself with really can instill that really important messaging for hope in so many different aspects. And I think that's why it's so important who you surround yourself with. And I'm a big advocate for that.
Yeah.
And then I think I really want to hear more about the local election side of things, because that is so important. We get so lost in these really, really scary and big idea situations. Like, obviously, you can't turn on the TV right now without hearing something about the presidential election. And it feels very do or die. It feels, though, that feels like the stakes. But if you vote down the ballot and if you focus on that local level politics, it feels more attainable.
It's digestible. And I think like something that I try to tell people or remind my friends when they get overwhelmed, and this number is so astonishing, at least to me, is in 2023, there were over 100,000 elections in the United States. And that was an off year, right? So when you think about...
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that includes like, there's not 100,000 election days, obviously. I'm saying about elections like individual positions that we voted for across the country. And that was an off year. So this year, that number is so much higher. And so for me, like, when you think about all of the positions you've never even heard of that people vote for, who are in charge of like your water in your town, or like making sure your sidewalks are accessible, or like all of these things, they're majority not scary people. They're majority people who have really good intentions and values for their community. And there's so many more of them. But I did a series back in March during Women's History Month before Kamala had announced, and frankly, the vibes were not where they are now. And I was like, we need some like energy around the election. And every single day in the month of March, I interviewed another woman running for office across the country for a position, from like governor to attorney general to the Secretary of State, who like that position has become so important all of a sudden because that's the position that decides to certify your election or not in your state. Like all of these women running for incredible things, down to like a really like your really local city council or state legislator, like whatever it is. And talking to them was one of the best things for myself that I've ever done, because it was so amazing to hear. And it just like reminds you of the big picture, that your life, who's president obviously incredibly impacts your life, and vice president, and their impacts on the court. But your day-to-day life is so impacted by the people who represent your local community and your state. And like those people, I think, are really often worth believing in.
100%. 100%. I think So we mentioned Roe v. Wade and it getting overturned earlier on in this. And essentially, for people that maybe aren't familiar with the Dobbs decision, that gave the power back to the states, correct?
Correct.
Exactly. And so that just is proof the federal level obviously is important, but voting down the ballot, really getting comfortable with your state legislator, your local legislature, so important because they are the ones that are making these decisions and having a greater impact, arguably, on your day-to-day life.
Yes, 100%. And look, Roe is an example of how that works, but there's so many things that are left up to your state. So for me, I'm like a reproductive justice person. So it really, really matters who you're voting for in your state because they have the power to make sure women in your state do or do not have access to reproductive health care. And that's everything from abortion to IVF to birth control and contraception to just like affordable maternity care, but like basic health things. But other things left up to the state are like everything in your public school system and like what books you're allowed to read and what bathroom you're allowed to go to based on how you identify and what sports team you can play with. And are we allocating funding for students who can't afford the internet? And like just all of these is there lunch available to kids who live in poverty or who don't have access to free lunch? Like those are decisions that your local legislator are making. And everything that isn't like budget, military, like high level impacts the whole country is predominantly decided by your state.
I'm so glad you said that because I feel like in a lot of ways, I think that's why the presidential election feels so big to so many people is because they think it affects everything. And it does. There's impact there for sure. It's less hands-on than I think people sometimes always realize.
But, because I don't want to diminish it, the president does appoint so many federal judges in your state who have a really big impact on what ultimately ends up at the Supreme Court, what like how cases are ruled. There's also over 300 judge positions up for the election because some states allow you to vote for your judges this year. So if you live in those states, pay attention because it's really important. But yeah, no, things are super local and everything, like no exaggeration, everything's political. There's an amazing creator I'm following right now. And her name's Abby, and she's amazing. And she's doing this series that's like 50 days. She started 50 days before the election cycle, and it's like 50 days why everything's political. And she's like going to Sunday night football game and explaining why football is political, and like going to a concert and explaining why the concert's political, and like why your hot girl walk's political, and just like all these things. And it's most of the things she's talking about are impacted by your local elections.
I follow this creator too.
Okay, yeah.
And I was seeing this recently and I was like, this is brilliant. This is a great series. Like this needs to go viral because it's so relatable and it's so easy to digest and it just makes it so plain and clear. It's brilliant. It's so brilliant. Y'all should go check it out. It's Abby McAdams, right? Yes.
But 100%, and there's also like gun control, a lot of gun control policies. While we need federal, national, common sense gun control, that will unfortunately probably take a while to see. But your state and local community has a lot of ability to do things.
100%. Gun control is very important to me. I don't cry very often, and the speech about gun control at the DNC had me in tears. So.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I cried every day at the DNC. I can't lie. Every single day.
That's so fair and valid. There were so many powerful speeches happening.
I was just like, I'm a very emotional person and I could not help it.
Wait, I think I saw your story or maybe it was a video where you're like, I'm like sobbing Hillary Clinton speaking.
Oh yeah, I was sobbing. Well, because, okay, so here's a backstory is I worked on the Clinton campaign when I was in college and I was like, and I was at the Javits Center in New York, which, if you're not familiar, is this building that's like all glass. And the campaign was hosting what was supposed to be her like winning party that night at the Javits Center because she was shattering the glass ceiling, and there's a glass ceiling at the Javits Center. Anyway, she lost, and I'm crying. And you know those photos that like went viral of like young girls crying after election day? Literally me sobbing on the front page of the New York Post and like different art, like CNN, in a super woman Hillary shirt, just crying. And I'm like,
That was your first touch of fame.
what?
Oh my God.
And
I
so many people tagged me in that photo on Facebook that every year in like November, I'm like, oh my God, it's coming again. Because every year people are like, ha, like re-up it, you know, in your memories. I'm like, oh my God, no.
Oh my God. Okay, actually, I think this is an interesting topic, and something maybe I could even use more education about. As the theme is rejection. In politics, it's very much like yes or no. You either win or you lose in many cases. So what was that like? You said you worked on the Clinton campaign, like all of a sudden she didn't make it. Hard no.
Yeah.
What happens next?
So I actually have a lot of feelings on this. I love that you asked this question. So because this is another topic I feel like I talk a lot about. I actually think this is a huge difference between the Democratic and, I don't want to say like Republican Party, but like the MAGA Party, is that I think Democrats, for the most part, we don't actually rally behind people. We rally behind like values and issues. So like when my friends say, oh, I'm going to go to a rally, my mindset is typically like, oh, for what? Like for climate change, for gun control, for reproductive rights, like what are you going to rally for? Where when you hear from the conservative party, like I'm going to go to a rally, your mindset kind of immediately goes to like Trump and a Trump rally, like what you know. And so I think because of that, we're not as culty, but also because of that, we our losses are felt in a different way, because it's about, we often like are all in about an election season because of the issues and values that matter to us, and less so because of a person. And I am a huge Kamala fan and supporter and like very excited, but I am putting so much into this election not because of who the candidate is, although I like very much am a fan of the candidate, but because all of the things I think I'm fighting for. And those fights don't stop if she wins or if she loses. And so I think like when Hillary lost, it was sad. I was so depressed, mostly because of what it meant that so many people voted for the other person and like where we were as a country and in terms of our values and belief system. But like, even if she won, a lot of the things that keep me interested in politics and like keep me fighting, those fights don't just stop on November 6th or like November 7th or 8th or whenever the election's certified. They, you know, whenever the votes are counted, November 9th, November 10th, like whatever date we're talking about this year. Those keep going. Like Kamala's president, we don't automatically have gun control and reproductive rights access to for people and affordable food and healthcare and house. Like those things don't happen on day one, and those are things that you have to keep advocating for.
100%. And I think that's a really good point. Getting elected is just half the battle. The real work begins after that.
Yeah, which is why I think for me, when I think about losses, Trump is like a unique situation because it represents such a huge value belief. But when you're looking at like just elections in general, it's easier to digest because you're doing the work no matter what.
No, I really appreciate that answer because I think it is applicable again to so many spaces beyond politics too.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure a lot of the listeners here are as involved in the political space as we are, but I think, you know, things can feel like a hard no sometimes or a hard yes even, and you're thinking, oh, okay, this has made the decision, this is the path forward. But there are so many different ways to continue forward. It's not just always one thing, just one barrier getting in your way. there's still 50 gazillion ways to move.
100%. And I think this is so cliche, but something that I always think about and that I hear people say all the time is to like remember your why, because that will like keep guiding you to the right direction. And whatever it is you're interested in, if it doesn't work how you initially think, rejections, redirection, and you just keep going.
Absolutely. You know, we've talked about it, we've touched on it a little bit, but you know, I know one thing that we again came together about was reproductive health. And that is a big, hard no for so many women around our country.
Yeah.
And it's very, very scary. And this is coming from me. And one reason I wanted to bring this up is because I value this issue so much and this topic so much, but I didn't always. And I think it's important to talk about that transition, because I think there's a lot of people who are on the fence about this issue in a lot of places. And, you know, I grew up Catholic. I went to a Catholic university. I was surrounded by a lot of Catholic friends, and it gets instilled in you from a very young age that being pro-choice is basically you're going to hell if you vote pro-choice. And so it's one of those things that it took for me, actually. I remember the change for me was when it clicked that the government can control my body. They can tell me no. And I think that, I don't know why, because I had friends that would argue with me all the time. They'd be like, oh, well, blah, 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 this, point. Excellent points in hindsight. But at the time, nothing was clicking until I don't remember who said it, but they're like, you really want the government, the federal government, to be able to make decisions for you.
You know, first of all, like, I applaud you and thank you for being so open about your personal journey, because I think it helps a lot of people to hear that, and that it's okay to change your mind on a topic and like get educated on it. I think a lot of us feel like we have to know how we feel about something and there's no room for growth. I also grew up in like a religious community. And so it's a really tense topic for people. The thing I really like to stress about what you said, and just like to people in general, is the whole point of choice is that you can still choose not to have one and that you personally don't agree with it. Like, the church can still say, we would not want you to do this, or like whatever. But the point is that not everyone is Catholic. Not everyone, like, you can make the choice that is right for you. And that doesn't mean that, like, if you are someone who is like, well, I would never do this, and that's great. You never have to. The whole point of choice is that someone else can. But I think we're getting to a place where, unfortunately, the visuals are so much clearer that women are dying, that becoming pregnant in America is increasingly a health and risk and like death risk, and that there is so much at stake for women not being able to make the decisions between her and her doctor that are right for her body. And I mean, being pro-life in my mind is valuing the life of a living person as well. So, but that's just like a little starter, a little tidbit. But no, I think like not letting the government make that decision for you is all that we're asking. Like, let that be a decision that's made between the individual and her medical team, their medical team, whatever it is.
100%. And I'm glad that you talked about the health crisis that I think it really is, because I think people get so logged into the politics of it, and the quote unquote ethics and morality of it, rather than like the fact it is a scientific medical issue.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to say. I also think, coming from the idea of choice, the other wake-up call, like within that for me, was like, oh, where do we draw the line then? If they can choose this about me, what else is going to be up for?
I mean, we're seeing that now. We're seeing like the goalpost keeps moving, right? Like, Roe v. Wade was overturned, and now we're talking about eliminating access to IVF fertility treatment that more than 90,000 babies are born through every single year. That is like as pro-life as you can get. It's just helping people have children. And like, I know I have an autoimmune disorder and like a genetic disorder, like I will likely need to use some sort of fertility treatment to have children one day. You're sitting here telling me you value the life of a child so much, but you're not going to let me access that care. But we're talking about contraception, right? We're talking about access to birth control, access to, and that does include condoms for the men. Like you also need to pay attention because condoms are contraception. And if they're taking away contraception, that's your condoms too. And I just feel like men are like, this isn't about me. And I'm like, it is. And we're seeing in like Florida this past week, it was taken even further than it ever has, where in Florida now, they're telling schools during sex education, not only should they teach abstinence, which we are seeing across like a lot of Republican states right now, not only in a public school that is in church and state, not religiously affiliated, should they teach abstinence and should they not teach about contraception, but in Florida, they're no longer allowed to have conversations or discussions around consent in public schools.
Oh,
This school
absolutely
year.
not.
And so you're looking at women can't use birth control. They can't use condoms. They can't have an abortion if they get accidentally pregnant, but we're also not talking to young boys about consent.
I have like a chill going down my spine right now. That's terrifying.
And that's like, we see copycat legislation across states all the time. So like when something starts in one place, it is literally the matter of days, if not weeks, before we see that pop up in other areas. Reproductive justice is like not just about abortion. It's about like women being able to be in charge of their own health care, raise a child in a healthy and sustainable way, like have affordable health care for their child, for themselves when they're pregnant, like all of the things. And we're seeing attacks on that in every single level. I mean, birth control your access to birth control is on the ballot, not like literally, but within who you vote this year.
100%. And if any of this is resonating with anybody listening, please make sure you're registered to vote. Please get to the polls this season. Please, 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 please. I am saying it with my full chest.
Yes. And I know
Go
that was
vote.
a lot of, not to be like fear mongering, but in a positive way to, do the hope thing. Over 10 states have abortion rights on the ballot this November, meaning citizens of your state said, okay, fine, bet you want it to be a state. Based on states, we're going to organize, we're going to get in some states over 1 million signatures to put a petition on the ballot this November to codify our right to abortion in the state. Since the overturning of Roe, we have seen abortion win in every single state that it's been on the ballot on because overwhelmingly people want access to reproductive rights. And here's a stat that I think is great, is that 8 in 10 Americans believe in the right to choose. And 8 in 10 Americans do not believe in abortions, but they recognize that government shouldn't be making those decisions for people, and that oftentimes you have no idea the position that someone's in, if they are a victim of assault, if they, just lost their job, like whatever it is, and they won't be able to take care of their family, if they're sick, like if they have a child who's sick and has really high medical care, like any of these things, if the child's like, if their husband's abusive or their spouse is abusive, like there's just so many reasons. And 8 in 10 Americans do not agree with abortion, but 8 in 10 Americans agree with choice, that like they can't be making that choice for someone else. And that's a really powerful stat because that's 80%. That is, in the political world, 80% of people agreeing on something is so high, like A+.
That's so true. And I remember when I first heard that stat, I was astonished because, again, growing up in a small religious community, that was not the stat of my hometown, that's for sure. Yeah. But when you look at the wider population, it is a universally accepted idea that choice is important. And I think, thank you for highlighting that. Do you, by chance, know the 10 states off the top of your head?
Florida, yes, on 4. Nebraska. Nebraska one's really interesting because they have 2 things on the ballot. One's pro and one's against. So the decision that you have to actually pay attention a lot towards where you're voting. I thought I had it like pulled up, but I don't. But I can send it to you.
Amazing. And I will put it in the show notes then, just so we can really target like the people that live in those states that
Yeah.
might be listening. I just want to make sure people are aware, because I know,
Arizona.
goodness,
A lot of
Arizona
yeah.
definitely is on there. I
Yeah.
know. But there's just so much out there right now. There's so much. Here's what I'll say to anybody that maybe is new to the political scene or is overwhelmed by everything that's going on. Really try to, I would say, focus in on things that you really care about. Like, you don't need to be an expert on everything. You don't need to have everything figured out right now. Just really, really hone in on the things that you care about and make sure that you are taking steps to support what you want in those areas.
And I saw, to add on to that, 'cause I love that. And I think that could be like hope. It's like you see this vision for the future and you're like, I want that. Is there's been a lot of commentary online about the concept of like a one issue voter, and that's not, like, people feel bad about that or guilty about that, or it's like not dimensional enough. And so this week I saw someone start a conversation around something called like, I'm a threshold voter, where I'm not a one issue voter, but I have just like basic thresholds for, you need to believe in the LGBTQ community's right to marry who they love, and like you need to believe in a woman's right to birth control, and you need to believe in common sense like gun control, like just threshold things that to me matter. And just like sit down, don't think about politics, think about the things that like in your ideal community matter to you. And that's like the threshold, that's the bar. Someone that you're voting for to represent you needs to reach those like threshold values that you have.
For sure. And I think I've definitely used it for past elections. I'm sure it still exists, but a website that will tell you the candidates at every level
Yes.
who check off the things that you care about.
There's so many great resources online now, and it's easy. It's like you can find so much good information on the people who are running. So take 10 minutes, be an informed voter, and make sure you know your rights when you go to the polls. There's a lot of concerns about this year. So there's hotlines to be able to call in the line if you need it while you're at the polls, in case you need to report anything or there's any kind of voter intimidation. You have a right to vote. You like legally have that right to vote, and no one can tell you that you don't.
Oh, 100%. I think I'm so glad you said that, because voter rights are so important to me. But I know I have a lot of disabled listeners, and there are a lot of inaccessible polling stations as well. And knowing your right to vote by mail, obviously that has to be done in advance, but that is an option.
Each state has different policies, so just make sure you're like checking into your state's rules and guidelines and deadlines, and every state has different voter ID laws, but like websites make it really simple for you to know what you need to know.
100%. Oh, voter rights are important. Get out and vote, friends. Haley, I want to be mindful of time. I do have like 5 like quick based questions if you're good. All right. I ask this to everybody. What is a song that any time that you're like feeling unmotivated, feeling down, will always pick you back up?
Oh my gosh, this is so cheesy, but I listen to Legally Blonde's soundtrack, and the song actual title, I like never know song titles, but it's like the one where she gets the internship. It's like seeing my name up on that list. It's like the chorus. Anyway, I actually listen to that soundtrack nonstop. I just never know the names of actual songs, but that one gets me.
I love it.
Yeah.
As a musical theater girly.
I'm a Broadway girly. Yeah.
Wait, okay, we have to connect on that later. What is something, I call it a rejection rescue kit, something that you do, whether it be a self-care ritual, whether it be a product that you use? What's something that you reach for when you're kind of in a low state?
Ben and Jerry's. I eat ice cream like basically every day of my life. And I think there's little that it can't bring me back down. I'm a big walker, and then I really lean on my friends, like just disconnect for a little bit, turn things off, and like be present with your actual community.
Yes, I love all of those things. Ice cream, I have to ask, this is not one of the 5 questions. What's your favorite flavor?
Okay, I have a system. So half-baked is my favorite, followed by chocolate chip cookie dough, followed by cherry Garcia, and it's that order if they're out. And I like basically always have a pint in my freezer at all times.
You're making me hungry. I may need to go to the store. That sounds so good. I love half baked too, so that's incredible.
Yes, it's so good.
You're such a powerhouse. You do so many cool things. You're always traveling around and you're really making a lot of impact every single day. But one thing that we all do is we do things scared. So what was the last thing that you did scared?
Oh my gosh, I'm always scared. I have so much imposter syndrome. I spoke at a rally in a park on Saturday, and I've never done like a rally talk before, and so I was a little nervous, but it was great. It went really well.
I saw that, and I've seen you speak several times. You're an amazing speaker, so I'm sure you absolutely slayed.
Thank you. But yeah, no, I'm always scared. I always say if you're not, that being scared just shows you care.
I had another person I interviewed for this podcast that said something very similar. If you're not scared, you don't care enough.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I like that. I think that's a really good thing to remember. Everybody, listen. That's an important thing to keep in mind. When it comes to just like life in general, what's like a nugget of wisdom that you would like people to like hang on to, whether they may be entering the political space for the first time, creator space for the first time? What's like just something that has really empowered you in your career?
Two things. One is I'm a big quote girly, if you can't tell. If you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. I think about that one all the time because like you want to keep growing, pushing yourself, and it's okay to feel like you're like, why am I here? And the second one is to really try to not worry what other people think. I think especially in the creator space, it prevents a lot of people from getting started because they're worried about what people might say, and the people who care about you won't say anything.
I'm so glad that you used that combination because I think that is a lot of people struggle with self-rejection is what keeps coming back as like a main topic of this podcast. And both of those lead to self-rejection. Like if you are in a room where you are the smartest person in the room, you're like holding yourself back in many ways. Yeah. And then same thing when you're comparing yourself to other people. That's a method of controlling that. So, thank you so much. Final question, Haley. Where can people find you? What do you want to promote? What do you want people to check out?
You can follow me on Instagram and TikTok, and it's just at Haley Lickstein, my name. So easy peasy.
Easy peasy. It will be linked down below. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me and just for being such a light in everything that you do. So
likewise, I really appreciate it. This was so much fun. You are such an angel and such a positive person, and you bring so much hope to everything that I feel like I've learned from your page. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Thank you guys so much for tuning into this week's episode of Access Denied. New episodes launch every Tuesday, so I hope that you will subscribe, download, whatever you do to make sure you're here every single week. We have so many incredible guests coming on, and I want to say a huge shout out to JP Wonder Sound for dropping this sick beat that you're listening to right now. Thanks to everybody who made Access Denied possible, and I will see you next time. Bye!